Okie dokie. 3, 2, and 1. I'm taking a page out of Nathaniel's book because that's what he was doing. Thank you so much for coming along to this session this afternoon. My name's Sara Wiggins, and I'm going to be talking to you about Classroom Mastery. It's a program that is all about transforming behaviour through routines and a behaviour curriculum. And I'm going to be doing talking about a few things pertaining to that. But before I start, I just want to give a bit of background about me and who I am, because I think it's important to note who's talking at you for the next 45 minutes. I've been in education for 13-ish years now. I was a teacher from Perth, Western Australia. I've taught up in the Pilbara in the middle of the desert. I've taught in tiny farming towns in the Wheatbelt and in the Perth metro region as well. Prior to joining the Classroom Mastery team, I was a deputy principal at a primary school of around 1,200 students, and I was employed there in its foundation year to establish the student engagement processes and positive behaviour stuff. And so I'm heavily involved with that school-wide PBS. I've had some experience there. And also in West Australia, we have a fabulous program called CMS that's based on the work of Barry Bennett and Peter Smilanich, and I always say that name wrong. But I've worked heavily in that space as well. And so I've got a real passion for student engagement and behaviour and getting that right in schools. I also love, and I'm a huge advocate of science of learning and supporting teachers with getting high impact teaching practices right in the classroom, and have done a lot of coaching in that space too. So that's a little bit about me and my passion areas. I'm currently working for Classroom Mastery, which is a program that comes under Knowledge Society, and I'm the lead coach and trainer in that program. So I go all around Australia and work with school leaders and teachers to establish behaviour curriculum in their schools and to support teachers gaining confidence to be able to take control of their classrooms. Today's session, I'm hoping I'll give some insight into student behaviour that's informed by neuroscience, youth studies, trauma practice and positive psychology and a bunch of other stuff. We'll take a look at some of the research. I'm hoping I'll highlight the power and the importance of establishing a behaviour curriculum at your school that really outlines what your school's beliefs, values, norms, routines and rules are. Because this is really what supports that positive culture in schools. And I'm going to share some stories from some of the schools that we've worked with and the impact that they're seeing on their students and on their teachers within the school. That's what I'm hoping to achieve today. But before I get into all of that, I want to talk about what's going on sort of nationally around behaviour, because I think when we observe the trends in behaviour, it's not surprising to educators that we need to have behaviour curriculum. It's not a surprising thing. It's pretty clear. I want to talk about the Strong Beginnings report. This report came about really briefly. Minister Clare said, let's do some investigation into what's going on in our universities. How are pre-service teachers getting prepared to be out in their classrooms? And this came about because there was a bit of a mass exodus of pre-service teachers leaving the degree before they finished, and also leaving the career really early and not feeling like they were equipped and ready to handle the challenges that come with being a classroom teacher. And so this report said, it came up with some recommendations of what universities need to do to make sure that classroom teachers are ready. And there was a few things in there about the architecture of the brain, how we learn is really important, how to choose the right instructional strategies for how we learn was in there, how to be culturally responsive was in there, all really important things. The thing that I'm going to talk about today, the last thing that they recommended was skills and practical strategies for creating positive classroom culture. So how do we do that? And making sure that early career teachers have those skills and strategies. And I don't know about you, but what I remember from when I was in university from my behaviour units, the only thing that I can remember is Pavlov's dog. And it has never really helped me when I've been dealing with a kid who's off task in my classroom. And so, and often we get the line, you'll learn it on the job, you'll learn it on your prac, and often we don't. And so really important in the Strong Beginnings stuff there. I also want to talk about the PISA results come back to strong beginnings in a moment. PISA results, everyone kind of goes a bit crazy over the PISA results because Australia does really poorly on that international scale. We rank, I think it was 2018, it was 69 out of 76 in the Index of Disciplinary Climate. In 2022, the maths results showed 71 out of 81 countries in the Index of Disciplinary Climate. This is our students that are being surveyed that are saying, I can't learn because my classroom's too noisy, it's too disorderly, I'm too distracted. And I think that's what hits home about that. It's the students that are saying that. I want to talk about this one really quickly. They did the Senate inquiry into the issue of increasing disruption in Australian classrooms. And what was really interesting about this is that the submissions to this inquiry just really show that there's a bit of a disconnect, or there's not a common theme across schools in Australia around what behaviour should be in schools. And what we know it should be is about teaching and learning, because that's our core business. And so this inquiry came up with some recommendations as well, and they're pretty good recommendations. Number one was to fast track that initial teacher education requirements. Make sure that teachers are ready for the classroom. They've got the skills and strategies. The second one was about ACARA developing behaviour curriculum. So we need to have behaviour curriculum is what I take from that. We've got to have behaviour curriculum. The third was that we need to have it invests in practical professional learning for teachers around how to develop positive classroom culture, skills-based stuff. And so, really important, that's what leads me to why I'm here today, because we're working on providing that really practical professional learning around behaviour curriculum with schools. And so I want to share some of the theory behind what we're doing when we're working with schools, some of the theory and some of the research. And at Classroom Mastery, we look at a consilience approach to behaviour. And so consilience comes from this handsome fellow, William Whewell, and he was a 19th century Enlightenment thinker. And so what William Whewell said was, why can't I look at all the major disciplines, all the research, all the evidence, and use it all to help me make help me understand behaviour, human behaviour. So let's look at all of it. And so that's what consilience is. It's an integrated approach. It's moving away from this real binary approach that we often have in schools, where as a school, we're trauma-informed, and that's how we do behaviour, or as a school, we're restorative practice, and that's how we do behaviour. And it's actually, let's look at a consilience approach. Let's look at an integrated approach where we go, what is all the evidence saying from all the major disciplines, and let's bring that together and make a really informed decision around behaviour in schools. Consilience came back to life with this guy, Edward O. Wilson, and he took a slightly different approach to consilience, because he talked about what is the overarching outcomes for education, what do we want for young people, and how can we ensure that young people flourish or thrive in school. And so what is the evidence and research that helps us to make sure that we can have these building blocks to ensure that young people can flourish. And we like the word flourishing at Classroom Mastery. Flourishing actually came from Aristotle in 350 BCE. And he said the whole point of human existence was to flourish. And I think about that in terms of your classrooms and your schools. The whole point of that is that we want our young people to flourish in the space that they're in. So how do we provide that? What do we have to do? It doesn't matter if we look at the self-worth research, if we look at the resilience research, we can look at Martin Seligman's work. He wrote a book titled Flourishing. I really like Fiona Stanley's work, because Fiona Stanley, she wrote a book called The Lucky Country, and chapter 2 of her book says how children flourish. She was an epidemiologist, did lots of work in early years development and babies, and she talked about how young people, in order to flourish, need 4 things. They need a sense of belonging. They need to feel connected to the adults in their lives and feel like they belong. They need a sense of competence. I'm good at something, I can achieve, and I tell you you're good at something. They need a sense of independence. That's that student voice and agency. They need to be able to stand on their own 2 feet, make decisions. They need to feel connected to a broader social network. That's that idea that we actually can't flourish or thrive unless we're part of groups. And I think schools do that really well because we have clubs and activities and things for young people to get involved in. I want to talk more about this one, the circle of courage, and I'm going to talk about it in the lens of routines and structures, and how by establishing really clear routines and structures in schools, we can actually make sure that we're hitting all of these in this circle of courage. The circle of courage was developed by Larry, and I always have to read it because there's too many names in the names and I forget. Larry Brentroy, Steve Van Brocken and Martin Brokenleg. There you go. It was developed by them, and it comes from Sioux Indian First Nations people in the United States, and it's child rearing practices. And it says if we can have all of these positive needs or components, that young people can have positive growth, yeah? And so the first one I want to talk about is belonging. Belonging is all about, in the classroom, is about how a young person feels. Do they feel that they've got a connection with the teacher? It's about relationships. And I think you've probably never been to a professional learning session around behaviour and not talked about relationships, because it is crucial that we do foster those positive relationships. However, relationships come through the dependability, reliability and structure that routines offer. Because when I, as a student, come to school and I know how I'm expected to line up, how I'm expected to behave in the classroom, how I'm supposed to answer questions, how the language that my teacher's going to use, it's all really predictable. Even down to when I make a behavioural error, I know how my teacher's going to respond to me. When all of this is really consistent and really predictable, I feel safe. And when I feel safe, I can trust, and then I can have that sense of belonging. So it's really crucial that we set those structures. The second one is mastery. This is all about when everybody wants to succeed, everyone wants to do well, and be told you've done a good job. And that's really crucial for young people so that they can flourish, to have this sense of mastery, that they've got talent and they're good at something. But that has to come from a classroom where learning's taking place. And what we know from those PISA results is that often our young people are feeling like they can't learn in the classroom because the teacher's feeling like they can't teach in the classroom because there's noise over here and settle down over there and calling out here, and there's all these bubbly behaviours, these persistent, low-level, disruptive behaviours that we've got to try and get under control so that learning can take place. And then when we set those preconditions for learning and our young people can learn, then they can feel that sense of mastery and achievement. Really important that we set those conditions. The next one is about independence. And so independence is all about responsibility, because it's really hard to be independent when we don't have the responsible behaviours underneath that. And so this is about teaching the explicit behaviours that we want to see in the classroom and making them get to be automatic and habitual behaviours in our young people. And when these do become automatic, young people have much more sense of power over what they're doing in the classroom and their learning, because I know how to behave, I know how to answer questions, I know how to respond and do all of these things that are going to allow me to be successful in the classroom. Once we foster those responsible behaviours, I have a sense of power because I've got that independence. The last one is generosity, and it's my favourite one. Generosity is all about altruism and empathy and respect, but we actually have to teach our young people what it is to be empathetic and what it is to be respectful, because it's really hard to respect something, it's really hard to be generous if you don't respect something. In the classroom, if we don't respect the space, we don't necessarily want to tidy up after ourselves and make sure we look after the space. If we don't have respect for the teacher, we're not going to be, we might be rude and call out and do things like that. So there's a lot of things that come with this idea of generosity. But there's actually a really easy way that we can foster this with children, and it's about acknowledgements. When teachers take every opportunity to acknowledge young people when they are giving back to the classroom, this encourages them to do more and more and more. So I'll give an example. There's a young person who carries the phys ed gear down to the oval, the cricket gear down to the oval for the phys ed class, and the teacher says to them, "Thank you so much for bringing the cricket gear down. Really appreciate you doing that. Thank you." every teacher took as many opportunities as possible to acknowledge young people when they do give back to the classroom and give back to the school, we'll start to see a shift there. And actually the young person, when they hear that, goes, I'm important and I matter, and they want to give back to the school community. So we can really foster that and encourage that through that sense of generosity. So that's the circle of courage. I want to talk about the brain a little bit as well, because when we work through classroom mastery, we draw upon neuroscience as well. And so there's some things that, and I'll actually preface this by saying, I am not a neuroscientist, I am a teacher. So this is a very simplistic version, but I think there are things that are really important for teachers to understand about how neural pathways are developed and how those neural pathways affect the way that we think and act and feel. And so these are things like the fact that the amygdala responds in 11 milliseconds to perceived threats, and that actually our logical brain takes time to catch up and tell us that we're safe. And the fact that our logical brain is responsible for developing really important things like resilience, and it's not fully developed, the logical brain, until around the age, your mid-20s, early to mid-20s. So the young people that we teach are all still developing that part of their brain. Or the mirror neurons, that we look at somebody else and we see the emotions and we mirror those back to help us understand. These are all really important things to know as a teacher around how the brain works. I want to talk about biological primary and biological secondary knowledge, because these are important for us to understand. Biologically primary knowledge are those innate abilities and skills that we will develop as part of typical human development. These are things like the ability to comprehend spoken language, motor skills, social abilities. It's important to note that the ability to look at another human being and recognise, see their facial features, see their body language, hear their tone of voice, and recognise intent and determine if that person is friend or foe is something that we are doing all the time. Our brain just does it. It's biologically primary knowledge. And so I always say, you know, as a teacher, it's important to reflect on that, because if I've got a bit of a resting bee face, is that affecting my ability to connect with young people in my class? Biologically secondary knowledge is different, because biologically secondary knowledge are those skills, they're culturally determined, and they're skills and abilities that have to be explicitly taught. We're not going to learn them unless we're taught them. These are things like reading, writing, vocational skills. If it's a subject area in a school, then it's biologically secondary knowledge, because we've got to teach it. Which leads me to my point around behaviour. The way that we behave in the social constructs of a school is biologically secondary knowledge. We have to teach it. We're not going to learn it by osmosis. You know, we can't assume that young people are going to come into our schools and know how to sit on a chair how we want them to, that they have to put their hand up to ask a question, how to sit on the mat, how to behave in the constructs of a classroom. It all has to be explicitly taught, which is why we need a behaviour curriculum. This comes from Dr. Tim McDonald's Centre for Independent Studies. The Classroom Mastery Program was developed by Knowledge Society and Tim McDonald. It's based on his book. This comes from his paper, and it describes what a behaviour curriculum is. And I'll quickly read it. A behaviour curriculum defines the expected behaviours in a school. The behaviour curriculum outlines the values of the school and the intended behaviour culture of that school. It clearly outlines the way these behaviours will be taught and maintained throughout the school. As part of the behaviour curriculum, the routines and rules that help to develop the behaviour culture are described. And so you can see in there, there's lots of different factors that come into it. But that word culture comes up time and time again. This comes from Tom Bennett, UK behaviour guru. And he says something quite simple. School culture is just the way we do things around here. And the way that I interpret that is, if I was a visitor in a school and walking around and I was going, oh my goodness, the students are they're so respectful, they're all lined up, it's really calm, all the students are saying please and thank you, they open doors, all of these behaviours, if I was talking about that in a really positive way, that you would be able to answer, it's just the way things are around here. And that's what the ultimate aim is. But what we know is actually that's really difficult to get to. And actually what it takes is really a lot of planning and a lot of forethought and a lot of explicit teaching and practice and feedback and acknowledgements to get to a space where you've got that sort of calm environment in a school. And so what we do at Classroom Mastery is we go and we work with schools to develop their behaviour curriculum. This is the heart of what our behaviour curriculum is, and it's actually about making sure that everything is aligned. So we talk to school leaders and school teachers around what are you defining your school culture to be? And underneath that, whatever you want the young people at your school to have learnt around how to behave at your school, we've got to put all of that underneath. But the ultimate aim is to get that culture that we've defined. And so we're looking at things like what are the norms, what are the expected behaviours, let's define the values, let's have really structured routines, what are the rules and what are the consequences, and actually how are we going to maintain that is a crucial part of the behaviour curriculum. Because I think actually it's really quite simple to define what we want that culture to be and what we want it to look like, but how we're going to maintain it is quite challenging. And so once we've done that, once they've created that behaviour curriculum and everything's really procedural and well documented, they've got to teach it because it's biologically secondary knowledge. So we've got to explicitly teach it, and we do that like any other curriculum through explicit teaching with repetition and with revision until we get those habitual automatic behaviours happening in the school. Rosenshine's principles apply to how we teach behaviour. I'm going to explicitly teach. I'm going to have to review what I've explicitly taught. I'm going to have to check that they've understood the elements of the behaviour curriculum. I'm going to present it to them in small chunks. I'm not going to try and teach every single routine all at once. I'm going to do it in small chunks, and I'm going to make sure that I provide really targeted feedback around that. All of Rosenshine's principles help us to get to a place where the routines and the behaviours that we're teaching are automatic and they move into the long-term memory of the young people. We have an approach to routines where we have a low variance approach across schools. So every classroom in a school will have a routine, take entry routine. They'll have the same approach in every classroom. And that's for the students because it reduces their cognitive load. When I, as a student, don't have to remember how, 10 teachers line me up and enter, it's a lot easier for me to do that in a really methodical and really safe way when it's the same way across. So we really focus on that, reducing the cognitive load of young people with the routines. This is an example of one of our scripts for entry routine. That's how we teach it. We work with schools to actually look at a script and go, let's contextualise this to make it effective for your school. And then they teach it. And I'm going to show you a video next. This video comes from Rosebud Secondary College out on the Mornington Peninsula. They were our pilot school. And Lisa and some of the staff and the students at the school are talking about what day one implementation of these routines. They started with a cue to start, an entry routine and an exit routine. She's talking about what that looked like on day one of introducing these low variance routines across the school.
Day one for the students meant that in every single class with every single teacher, they were taught the 3 routines initially. So they were taught, this is how we're going to enter the classroom.
Straight lines before we go in, please.
This is how we're going to exit the classroom. And this is what the cue to start is that the teacher's going to use. So they did that on repeat 5-6 times with every teacher, entirely scripted.
Ohayou gozaimasu. Suwatte kudasai.
Here's the routine. Here's the stability of school. Step into this space, be safe, know you can learn.
Firstly, I thought it was kind of strange, but as we got to use it more, I think it was really good because now we're not hurtling into the classroom and banging over stuff.
Lining up into walking and standing behind your chairs, it sets the tone for the lesson. So previously they might have been grouped outside, chatting away. So when we come into the classroom, that energy is reflected. Last year it was really hard for me to get everyone's attention at once. Actually having a cue to start, mine's Marco Polo, pretty simple. So you will need a pen out in front of you, please. Marco. Immediately they know that I'm wanting their attention, they repeat it, and they're focused on me. So yeah, for me that's the most powerful. It's increased the teaching and learning time because I'm not waiting that 4th or 5th time to get their attention.
So when we work with schools, we always start with those initial 3 routines and they embed those routines. We have coaching, really targeted feedback. I'll talk about that in a little while, but really targeted feedback around what those routines look like and the teacher skills that ensure those effective routines. And then we work with the school to say what other routines are going to be really important to have a low variance approach across your school, and they start to embed others. And so this next clip highlights a couple of the other routines that Rosebud picked up. They're looking at the voices routine and also asking and answering questions routine.
I'm just going to pull one more name out, and just the other thing we're doing in class is questioning. So I have a bunch of cue cards and I get them to choose one out, and that's how they answer a question. Who is our current Prime Minister? I think let's share in a partner voice. Who is going to answer our lucky last question?
Oh, me!
Let's go. Tyrone.
Anthony Albanese.
Every student who walks into every classroom knows that they could be called on multiple times in any lesson.
I'm going to pull out a name and you guys are going to help me with the pronunciation of this sentence. Coops, first character.
The teacher can pick out anyone's name, so it gives us a chance to be more switched on because you never know when you're going to get picked, and it just gives everyone a better opportunity to learn.
Second character, please, Mia.
When we first started, I think they were, as teenagers are, kind of bucking the trends a little bit or rolling their eyes, and also thinking that this was something that most people would just do for a couple of weeks and then it'd disappear. But very quickly they realised that it was a whole school approach. They could see the benefits. We talked to them about calmer, more settled classrooms, about more focused learning environments, about what that meant for the whole school community.
I love that gives everyone a better opportunity to learn. I think that's about all the routines, whether it's a safety routine and a routine around entering so that we've got the tone of learning and the calm and orderly. It's still about engagement because it's about getting into learning quicker. And there's a plethora of other routines there that are all about just having that better opportunity for learning to take place. Interestingly, I sat down with Lisa towards the end of last year and she told me that the students that got interviewed for this, it was on the 7:30 report on ABC. The students that got interviewed were just the interview was down at the coffee truck that they've got on site and was just grabbing random students to talk to them. And I would always think, if you're a leader in a school, you'd be going, which 4 kids is going to get interviewed, and let's prime them with the questions and make sure they've got the right things to say. So it's nice to know that these students were actually just random. So the thoughts that they have are their own thoughts, which is really lovely. That's a bit about the program. I'm going to share a bit more about classroom mastery and the effect that it's having, but I want to do that through just some stories and share some insights from some of the schools that we've worked with. We work with schools and systems all over Australia. This comes from the Melbourne Archdiocese Catholic Schools. So we worked with, in term 3 of 2023, 26 primary schools in this, the Max Western region to commence classroom mastery. And recently they did some surveys of their teachers to see how those routines are going in their schools. And so 96% of the teachers either agreed or strongly agreed that student behaviour had improved because of the use of these classroom mastery routines. 91% of the teachers either agreed or strongly agreed that their classrooms are calmer or more orderly because of the structure that these low variance routines really give. And I think that's the difference, is that every teacher in every classroom has got the same expectations, so it's the consistency that's really supporting that. And some of the things that the teachers said were around how whole school consistency really helps as a specialist teacher, how as a teacher with multiple different groupings throughout the day, working across classrooms, just seeing that consistency for learners, how the students can engage better because of that as well. So lots of really good stuff going on in that group of schools. We've worked with a school in Western Australia, Aquinas College, and they actually interviewed some of their boys to see their thoughts on the routines. Some of the boys are quite funny because they're like, we weren't sure about it at the beginning. We didn't like being told to line up. But some of the things that the boys say are really lovely, so I'll share that with you now.
I found the new classroom routine changes very positive.
I found them really helpful because it helps everyone to concentrate in our classes, which means we can get onto our work quicker.
I found the changes really helpful. I think it helps the boys get ready for the class and get focused.
It's impacted my learning in a very positive way because I can maximise my class time, get as much out of my teacher as possible without any disruptions from other students.
I think it's impacted my personal learning because I think it helps me focus more as well when all the other boys are focused and not talking.
It's helped my personal learning a lot because I know that the teachers are going to stop all of the people that distract you, and you would be able to get onto your work quicker and learn more content than we did in term 1 and 2.
The cue to start sort of helps the teacher. So when they say something, the students know that they want their attention now, not wasting as much time as we used to.
It's been a lot quieter in the classroom in general and a lot of an easier space to work in and get stuff done.
There's less disruption during class. It's more structured in the lessons. We know to come in, sit down, be quiet.
It was challenging at the start, but now once everyone adapts to it, it's kind of like, makes everything run smoothly.
I didn't really face many challenges. The first one was just getting used to it because we never used to do the cue to start, and now I know it and I've gotten used to it.
Cute, some of their responses, I think. I sat down with, I want to share a bit of a lengthier story. I sat down with Brent Kitchen, who's the AP at McClelland College, out again on the Mornington Peninsula. And I sat down and had a conversation with him around why they decided to use Classroom Mastery, so what was going on in their school, and then to highlight some of the journey around implementing a behaviour curriculum and structured routines. And so, McClelland is located on the Mornington Peninsula. It's quite a diverse student community. They've got a big emphasis on well-being. They've got a really well-resourced well-being team as it is. Some of the things that Brent mentioned were the reasons that the school decided to go down the route of implementing a behaviour curriculum, where they were looking at their data, and it was just this increasing trend around disrespect, particularly to teachers in their data, was just trending up. And so they wanted to tackle that. They also saw a lot of inconsistency around what are the expected behaviours and inconsistency around how behaviours were being dealt with as a college. And so this looked like a teacher, for example, students being late to class. One teacher in the campus might say, that's a detention, off you go to the office. Another teacher might say, in you get, sit down, quickly, you need to be quicker next time. Another teacher might say, wait at the door, I'll have a conversation with you, you're going to have to make up that learning time. And so within a college, when we have responses to the same behaviour being so different, it's not surprising that next dot point that they were having increases in escalation behaviours because of that inconsistent behaviour processes. Because the students then begin to go, well, this isn't fair, or this teacher likes me because they're letting me get away with it and this teacher doesn't. And so we really start to see actually what is a bit of an erosion in culture because of inconsistency in quite simple things. But the biggest thing that Brent talked about as being the number one thing that they wanted to tackle as a college was actually, let's just have more time on learning. Because the disruptive low-level stuff that's just really persistent, if we can get that under control, we'll actually have so much more time just to do our job and teach, and young people in our class to actually be able to learn. And so we went out and we worked with the school. We did a leaders masterclass where we worked with the leaders to start developing their behaviour curriculum routines. We worked with the teachers to continue refining that. And then they went ahead and they started their day one and embedded the 3 routines, entry, cue to start and exit. We then went on to do the coaching visit after they'd embedded those routines, where we would go and coach. I want to hear from, I've actually got a little snippet of Brent talking, a few snippets of him talking. This is Brent talking about how the implementation of those initial routines went.
So then we started to play around with, I guess, the nuance that sits behind it and the skills that sit behind it, but also, I guess, the control that a teacher has when they're in the classroom. And we've talked a lot about the teacher being in control from the very start of the lesson till the end of the lesson, and the fact that the entry routine and the exit routine promote that, but also the cue to start gives you a tool to ensure that all of your instructions to the class and teachings to the class are really, really effective.
I think Brent makes a really crucial point there about actually it's giving the power back to the teachers to be in control of that space. When we've got those structured routines, that's crucial, that we promote that safety, calm and orderly, and it's coming through my explicit teaching and my high expectations around those routines and behaviours. He also started to talk about the teacher skills, because when we go and we coach teachers and when we look at the routines and the literally hundreds of classrooms that I've been in and watched teachers demonstrate these routines with their students, it's these teacher skills that don't look particularly revolutionary. However, they make the absolute difference between a classroom and a routine that's working okay and one that's actually really highly effective. And so the feedback that we give are around these teacher skills. This is Brent just chatting about that coaching process.
It's been by far the most powerful of all the tools, all the PD, all the meetings, everything that we've rolled out in terms of being really effective in supporting staff. And what's been great is some staff have actually reached out for further support, which has been really good. More coaching around, I had a teacher email me the other day and say, look, there's this one class really struggling with the entry routine. Are you able to come along and do some observations and just provide me with some feedback? So yeah, really effective model. It's a really clear process that's mapped out in terms of how those conversations need to go, and staff have been really receptive to it.
The coaching part, I think the most powerful part in it is that we build capacity within the leadership team and within the school. So when we go out and we coach, it's kind of got a few purposes. One is that we're giving teachers targeted feedback around their routines and their teacher skills and how that's going, and looking to see if it's consistent across the school, because that's really important. But it's also about upskilling the leaders within the school to be able to give that really targeted feedback, because when we leave and we're not doing our coaching visits, we want that to sustain and be able to carry on. And so that's a really huge part. And you can hear Brent talking there about how they now have teachers reaching out and going, hey, can you come and give me some feedback around how this is going? I want some more observation and feedback, which is just great. Brent's just chatting about some of the success they've had.
So it was a pretty intensive focus for us. And as I mentioned, a lot of the concern or the big red flag for us was the increases in data. So at the end of the year, we sat down and looked at our suspension data, and it was really pleasing to see that the number of days of suspension that we had as a college had reduced by about 100, which is significant, really, really significant for us, and completely went against the trend. So what we're seeing is far less disrespect towards teachers, and far less suspensions that also fit within that sort of category or that area, which is really, really pleasing, because that was probably the number one issue for us. But we've seen far less escalation in students because we've got that consistency. And I think one of the biggest things that schools have typically battled is that, well, when this teacher doesn't care, why do you care? And then students become quite aggressive and confrontational towards those teachers that care, who are just doing their job and just doing the right thing. So the consistency across the school has been fantastic. We had a network meeting and we sort of presented what we've been doing. That would have been early term 4, so we're only a term in. And we had about 80 leaders and principals from the local area. And what they had commented on was just how calm the environment was. Even they were out between classes, so students moving from one class to the other. The exit routine, the entry routine, you know, one group came back from year 9, which is probably our tightest, most intense area of the school, just the way that it's built. They said, oh, we cannot believe how calm it was, and you know, the way that the students were moving into classes and welcomed into the rooms. So if I was going to talk about a success story, it wouldn't be about a student, it would be about the environment of the school. We had a new assistant principal start with us this year. She said, I've been out to a few classes and it's strange. I walk in and they're just quiet and listening and learning. And that's the majority now, which is fantastic. So yeah, that's a big celebration.
And this is just some of that data that that Brent was just talking about, and the reduction in a really short. They're still early days with these whole school processes, but they're having a lot of success. And one of the things that I think Brent and his team have done really well is they've put an emphasis on the induction process of that. At the beginning of this year, they had some really targeted professional learning around the why behind the program, and gave opportunity for new teachers to go and observe the current routines and structures in the school and what that looks like, along with providing the things like the scripts and those resources have just really supported that continuing success. And so one more little snippet from Brent.
Different schools will do different things. Consistency is the key, and I think that this is a great vehicle for that. But if you just look at the routines as a standalone and without delving into the why, without the ongoing support, and as I said, that really unique coaching model that comes along with it, doing those things right is what ensures that it's really effective. And I think that that's what's unique, and that's what I would recommend.
So, you know, I think it's just about that, the ensuring consistency is what he's talking about there, and it's just so crucial. Look, I am nearly out of time. There's a couple of things I want to share before I wrap up. First is this one. Some of you may have been in the previous session with Dr. Nathaniel Swain. He and I are partnering up to do a session in July on the 17th for new educators, early career teachers, around the sort of basics of science of learning and how to establish positive classroom culture. So some really tangible workshops and things in that space. So if you want more information, the QR code's there. And if you want any more information around classroom mastery and the work that we're doing, we do have a community, so feel free to join and get in touch. We also have some little cards on your way out if you want a little card with some more information. But thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And have a lovely rest of your afternoon. Thank you.